One of the most enigmatic relics in the Lies of P universe is the Arm of God, a relic sought after by many we meet throughout our adventure. This is due to the immense power the relic can bestow on whoever wields it, which is something we see twice at the end of the game. First with Simon Manus, who uses the Arm of God to become a god himself, and then with Geppetto, who uses the Arm of God to bring his son back to life. Given the power that the Arm of God can provide, it's no wonder that many in Krat seek to get a hold of it. But despite the importance of this relic, we know surprisingly little about its origins. The most important question being, who does this arm belong to? This is a question that doesn't have a clear answer either in the base game nor the DLC. But just because it doesn't have a clear answer, it doesn't mean that we're completely in the dark. All you have to do is look a little closer to realize that this relic doesn't belong to God like its name seems to indicate. It actually belongs to a very important person in the Bible. In the same way that you can find many references to other famous stories and fables in Lies of P, a keen observer might have noticed references to biblical stories throughout the game. The Arch-Abbey of the Isle seems to be heavily inspired by the Tower of Babel, and the fact that there's a man at the very top of it who's trying to become a god should make it quite clear that this is a reference to the story in Genesis. We can also find another item named the Shepherd's Amulet, which seems to contain in its description a brief recap of the story of how David killed Goliath, and even the position we find Romeo in seems to be very similar to that of the crucified Jesus. Clearly, some kind of biblical tradition has influenced the culture of Krat. So with that in mind, could this arm really belong to the God of the Bible? Could this be Jesus' arm? Look, as much as I would love Round 8 Studio to explore a dark take on the story of the Bible, I'm afraid the answer is no. The answer is slightly less heretical. Because many Lies of P fans have come to believe that the Arm of God actually belongs to a twisted version of Adam, the first human created by God. They've come to this conclusion because during the fight with Simon Manus, he uses the arm to open a portal to another dimension. From this dimension, we can see a giant glowing arm that comes down to make contact with the Arm of God. The imagery here is very similar to Michelangelo's creation of Adam, which depicts the moment when God gave life to his first human. But there's an interesting difference between Michelangelo's painting and this moment found in Lies of P. A YouTuber named The Inhuman One has pointed out that the arm that comes from the other dimension is a left arm, while the arm that God uses in Michelangelo's painting is the right one. But do you know who uses their left arm in the painting? Well, that would be Adam. Another piece of lore that might support this theory can be found in a heretical book titled The Witch-Krantor. At that moment, I knew for certain this seemingly benevolent being was very dangerous indeed, for Redacted did not know good and evil. If that last part sounds familiar, it's because this is the state that Adam and Eve find themselves in the Garden of Eden. It wasn't until they ate from one of the forbidden trees that their eyes were opened, and the Lord God said, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and also take from the tree of life and eat and live forever." Much like the biblical Adam, this being doesn't seem to have a moral compass. He doesn't know good and evil. So is this it? Does this mean that the Arm of God actually belongs to Adam? Well, it's not that simple. Because when you read other sources about this being, it really doesn't sound like the Adam we read about in the Bible. When I say Adam, you probably think of a regular human that God created, just like you and me. Meanwhile, this is how Saint Frangelico describes the being he saw in a vision. The being's alluring eyes alternated color between gold and rust depending on the light, but they paled next to its magnificent smile, a most amicable expression. Redacted had a smile that offered wisdom and benevolence. It could make wishes come true. If you ask me, none of this sounds like the Adam we learned about in Sunday school. You pair this fact with the ghostly left arm that comes from another dimension, and it becomes very difficult to say that this is the biblical Adam. But who said it had to be biblical? Something else I've noticed in Lies of P is the many references that it makes to concepts relating to Gnosticism, a first century religious movement that in a way was competing with traditional Christianity to win the hearts of believers. In Gnosticism, all sorts of biblical characters and stories are twisted in ways that even scholars today find it difficult to decipher. One of these twists comes with their interpretation of the God of the Old Testament, who the Gnostics believe to be an evil god who thinks he's the only god in existence, when in reality there are much more powerful gods above him that he is completely ignorant about. Another unexpected twist can be found with their interpretation of Adam, who in some Gnostic books is said to be a divine human archetype that lives in the Pleroma, the realm of the gods. In other words, Adam's description in Gnosticism seems to be closer to that of a god than a regular human, which is exactly what we see in Lies of P. A godly being that has the power to impart its own twisted form of immortality. And this is really interesting because it might give us a clue about what the sequel to Lies of P will be about. We know it's going to be about the Wizard of Oz, but I'm sure no one is expecting it to be a completely accurate retelling of that story. Round 8 Studio will most definitely twist the story just like they did with Pinocchio's. And one thing they could twist is the lore surrounding the Land of Oz itself. In the book, this is the mysterious land that Dorothy's brought to by a tornado. In this land, she meets all sorts of magical beings like witches, talking lions, and flying monkeys. While this world offers a nice location to tell a fairy tale for kids, I'm sure Round 8 Studio will want to update it for their Souls-like audience. Which is why I think the Land of Oz and Lies of P will become synonymous with the Pleroma, the realm of gods and where this being came from. And it will be up to the Tin Man himself to discover its secrets. Secrets that Paracelsus and his organization have kept hidden for thousands of years. I obviously have a lot to say about Paracelsus. Perhaps that will be next week's video. This week, I just wanted to make the strongest case for my favorite theory regarding the Arm of God. But I'm sure this isn't the only one. If you think you have a better theory regarding who the Arm of God belongs to, make sure to leave it in the comments section below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out my previous Lies of P video, where I go over the evidence for the Little Mermaid's underwater civilization in Lies of P. I may be a little bit biased, but I think it's a pretty cool video, especially if you're into the lore of Lies of P. But with that said, I want to give a big thanks to all of my YouTube and Patreon members for supporting the channel monthly. Especially to Mohammed. This guy has been giving really big super chats to the channel lately, so I really appreciate it. He has also been giving a lot of memberships to you guys, so if you're one of those who received the membership by him on the streams, please make sure to give him your thanks in the comments. I would also like to thank everyone who likes and shares my videos. It may not seem like much, but it really does help. And with that said, thanks for watching. And remember, go forth in the name of Olympus.